A difference of exactly 41 minutes separates a standard property intrusion from a highly coordinated target extraction. You might have seen the headlines floating around the internet over the past few weeks. The viral videos and the endless forum threads all point to a careless mistake. They claim a bizarre purchase made at a local hardware store is the key to unraveling the entire mystery. They say a simple receipt left behind, or a specific tool traced back to a checkout counter, is the smoking gun. That narrative is compelling, it is easy to digest, and it is completely unverified. The forensic reality of this case is far more terrifying than any internet rumor. When investigators from the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Pima County Sheriff Department arrived at the scene, they did not find a sloppy burglar who made a mistake at a hardware cash register. They found a digital void. They found a crime scene that had been meticulously scrubbed of physical anomalies, yet left behind a chilling electronic signature. This was not a crime of opportunity. This was a systematic breach of a secure perimeter. The true missing link is not a hardware store purchase. The real anomaly lies in a precise timeline of digital disconnections. A security camera goes dark. A biometric medical device drops off the network. The silence between those two events holds the answer to how an 84-year-old woman vanished into the night. We are going to strip away the viral misinformation and look exclusively at the confirmed data points. We will examine the blood evidence. We will analyze the digital footprint. We will look at the exact timeline established by law enforcement. If you want the cold, forensic truth without the speculative fiction, make sure to subscribe to Crime with John. We do not deal in rumors here. We deal in evidence. And the evidence in the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie points to an operation planned with terrifying precision. The internet wants you to look at a phantom hardware store receipt. Law enforcement wants you to look at the 41-minute blackout. Let us examine the timeline leading up to that digital silence. We must understand the environment before the breach occurred. We need to look at the days and weeks preceding the extraction to see the architecture of the surveillance placed upon the target. The hardware store theory is a distraction from the methodical stalking that was already in progress. 20 days before the actual abduction took place, the perimeter of the residence had already been compromised. On January 11th, 2026, the exterior doorbell camera recorded a highly disturbing event. A masked male suspect was captured on the digital feed. He was armed. He was standing directly at the threshold of the home. This footage was not released immediately, but was later confirmed and distributed by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The presence of an armed and masked individual at the front door, weeks before the crime, indicates a prolonged period of active surveillance. The suspect was mapping the environment. He was testing the response times. He was establishing the baseline security protocols of the target location. This completely eliminates the theory of a random home invasion. Random invaders do not conduct armed reconnaissance weeks in advance. They seek soft targets of opportunity. This target was specifically chosen. According to a report by the cable news network via the Tab, a wired surveillance camera was allegedly recovered from the roof of the property. This is a crucial detail that elevates the sophistication of the stalking phase. If an external party successfully mounted a wired camera on the roof, they had uninhibited access to the daily routines of the inhabitants. They knew when lights turned on. They knew when vehicles arrived. They possessed total situational awareness. This level of dedication requires resources and significant technical capability. We must ask why an 84-year-old woman would warrant this magnitude of premeditated surveillance. Nancy is the mother of National Broadcasting Company anchor Savannah Guthrie. This high-profile connection immediately changes the threat assessment. The abductor was not looking for loose cash or jewelry. They were targeting a high-value individual with access to significant financial networks. The meticulous preparation suggests the perpetrator understood the stakes and the inevitable federal response. Fast forward to the evening of January 1st, 2026. The routine of daily life continued seemingly undisturbed. At 9:48 in the evening, Nancy was dropped off at her residence. Her son-in-law, Tommaso Cioni, drove her home after they shared a dinner together. This timeline is confirmed by reports from Columbia Broadcasting System News. He watched her enter the home. The door closed. The headlights faded as he drove away. At 9:48, the house returned to its baseline state. It was quiet. It appeared secure. But the environment was completely blind to the architectural surveillance that had allegedly been established above it. The perimeter was already breached in spirit, if not yet in physical fact. The occupant was entirely unaware that the testing phase of the operation had concluded. The execution phase was about to begin. The house sat in silence for several hours. The neighborhood remained calm. There were no reports of suspicious vehicles circling the block. There were no panicked calls to emergency services. The environment was perfectly static. This stillness is the most unsettling aspect of the timeline. It represents the calm before a highly coordinated strike. The predator was simply waiting for the optimal window of vulnerability. The physical distance between the street and the front door was minimal, but the tactical advantage was heavily skewed toward the watcher in the dark. The preparation was complete. The target was isolated. The execution was imminent. Law enforcement behavioral analysts look for these periods of forced normalcy. The son-in-law, completing a routine family dinner drop-off, provides a stark contrast to the violence that would soon follow. The routine masked the impending extraction. At 12:15 in the afternoon, on February 1, 2026, the illusion of normalcy was shattered. Officers from the local police department arrived at the residence to conduct a standard welfare check. This action initiated the official missing person protocol. What they found inside the home immediately escalated the situation from a standard disappearance to a critical incident. The physical scene was chaotic. Investigators discovered blood evidence at the location. Drops of blood were located both inside the interior of the house and outside on the exterior grounds. This biological evidence was later matched directly to Nancy. The presence of blood indicates a physical struggle. It proves that the extraction was not entirely smooth. The victim resisted or was subjected to blunt force during the removal process. This physical reality stands in stark contrast to the next piece of evidence recovered at the scene. Investigators located a ransom note. According to reports from the cable news network and Time magazine, the perpetrators left behind documents demanding an astronomical sum of money. The demand was for up to $6 million. Crucially, this payment was not requested in unmarked bills or wired funds. The abductors demanded the $6 million be paid exclusively in Bitcoin. This is a massive forensic contradiction. On one hand, you have a sloppy physical scene with blood left behind. Blood evidence is a massive liability for any criminal. It provides a direct vector for deoxyribonucleic acid profiling. It suggests a loss of control. On the other hand, you have a highly sophisticated financial demand. Cryptocurrency extortion requires a complex understanding of blockchain technology. It requires digital wallets, routing networks, and secure communication channels to facilitate the transfer without exposing the recipient. A criminal sophisticated enough to demand $6 million in Bitcoin and allegedly wire a surveillance camera to a roof should theoretically be sophisticated enough to execute an extraction without leaving a trail of biological evidence. This friction between the physical evidence and the digital demands creates a significant analytical problem. Who is the exact profile of this perpetrator? Are we looking at a highly organized digital syndicate that hired localized analog muscle to do the physical lifting? Or are we looking at a solitary actor whose digital ambitions vastly outweighed their tactical abilities on the ground? The blood trail moving from the interior to the exterior suggests a hurried exit. It implies the suspect was carrying or dragging the victim. Yet the ransom note was left behind deliberately. It was a calculated message meant to initiate a negotiation protocol. The sheer size of the demand is also an anomaly. $6 million is a corporate-level extortion figure. It is not a standard kidnapping ransom. This indicates the perpetrators had thoroughly researched the financial background of the victim and her high-profile daughter. They knew exactly what the maximum extractable value could be. The officers securing the scene at 12:15 in the afternoon were looking at the aftermath of a collision between two very different criminal profiles. They had a physical crime scene that looked like a violent home invasion and a documentary crime scene that looked like a corporate cyber ransom. The initial responding units immediately locked down the perimeter to preserve the blood drops. Forensics teams began swabbing the floors and the pavement. They photographed the ransom note before carefully bagging it for fingerprint and chemical analysis. The Federal Bureau of Investigation was inevitably notified due to the extreme nature of the financial demands and the high-profile connections of the victim. The local jurisdiction was rapidly overwhelmed by the complexity of the digital footprint left behind. But the physical evidence and the ransom note were only the visible aftermath of the event. To understand exactly how the extraction occurred, investigators had to look backward. They had to examine the digital logs of the residence to find the exact moment the perimeter fell. They needed to find the point of impact. They needed to look at the routers and the connected devices. When digital forensic examiners pulled the logs from the smart home network, they discovered a timeline that completely rewrites our understanding of the crime. The data logs provided a precise and chilling window of operational activity. At 1:47 in the morning on February 1st, the exterior doorbell camera was manually disconnected from the network. It did not experience a power surge. It did not lose wireless connectivity due to a router failure. The physical device was tampered with and neutralized. This was the exact moment the perimeter was breached. The suspect intentionally blinded the primary defensive sensor of the home. This action requires physical proximity to the camera and technical knowledge of how to sever its connection without triggering a secondary tamper alarm. For exactly 41 minutes, the house sat in a digital blind spot. Then at 2:28 in the morning, a second critical disconnection occurred. Nancy relied on a medical pacemaker to regulate her heart rhythm. This device was connected to a mobile application that monitored her biometric data and transmitted it to healthcare providers. At 2:28, that application dropped off the network. The connection between the internal medical device and the external monitoring system was severed. This is the most terrifying data point in the entire investigation. The gap between 1:47 and 2:28 provides an exact 41-minute operational window. The extractor had 3/4 of an hour to breach the physical doors, secure the victim, manage any physical resistance which resulted in the blood evidence, leave the complex cryptocurrency ransom notes, and exit the location. What forensic footprint is left when an extractor operates within such a rigidly defined time frame? The 41-minute window suggests a heavily rehearsed operation. A standard burglar entering a home does not operate on a strict chronological schedule. They rummage. They search for valuables. They react to the environment. The precision of the digital disconnects implies the suspect entered the home with a singular, focused objective. They neutralized the camera. They acquired the target. They neutralized the tracking capability of the medical device. And they vanished. The disconnection of the pacemaker app is particularly revealing. It proves the abductor had intimate knowledge of the victim's medical hardware. They knew she had a pacemaker. They knew it transmitted data. And they knew how to stop that transmission. Did they destroy the mobile phone carrying the application? Did they place the phone in a Faraday bag to block the radio frequency signals? Or did they physically alter the medical device itself? The forensic logs cannot tell us how the connection was severed, only that it definitively ended at 2:28. This level of technical awareness heavily reinforces the theory of prolonged prior surveillance. You do not accidentally disconnect a highly specific medical monitoring application during a panicked home invasion. That action requires intent and specialized knowledge. The timeline is an uncompromising witness. It does not suffer from memory loss or emotional bias. The numbers dictate the reality of the event. The suspect owned those 41 minutes. They controlled the environment completely. Law enforcement now had a rigid chronological framework to build their investigation around. Every piece of physical evidence, every drop of blood, every fiber had to be contextualized within that specific window. Between 1:47 and 2:28 in the morning, we want to know your theories on this specific timeline. How does a single actor neutralize a digital perimeter and extract a non-compliant target in exactly 41 minutes without leaving overwhelming trace evidence? Drop your forensic analysis in the comments below. The math of this crime is deeply unsettling. The digital void speaks louder than any physical clue left at the scene. The investigators were forced to confront a ghost in the machine. They had to trace the invisible lines of network failure back to a physical suspect. The 41 minutes represented a masterclass in controlled violence and digital evasion. The suspect moved with absolute purpose. They did not linger. They executed the plan and initiated the extraction phase with military precision. The clock started at 1:47. The clock stopped at 2:28. Everything that matters happened in the dark space between those numbers. The investigation immediately pivoted to analyzing the physical profile of the suspect captured in the limited digital media available. On February 10, 2026, the Federal Bureau of Investigation officially released the doorbell camera footage to the public. The video provided critical morphological data. The suspect is described as a male standing approximately 5 feet 9 inches to 5 feet 10 inches tall. This specific height range helps narrow the biometric profile, but it is still a massive demographic pool. The most crucial identifying detail released by federal agents was not a physical trait, but a specific piece of equipment. The suspect was recorded wearing a black 25-liter Ozark Trail hiker pack. This is a massive forensic data point. Ozark Trail is a brand exclusively manufactured for and sold at Walmart retail locations. It is an extremely common, heavily mass-produced item. It is not specialized tactical gear. It is not high-end outdoor equipment that requires a specialized distributor. It is a budget-friendly, accessible backpack. This completely obliterates the internet rumor regarding a bizarre hardware store purchase. Federal evidence points directly to a massive big-box retailer, not an obscure local hardware outlet. This choice of equipment is a fascinating psychological indicator. Did the sophisticated extractor, who demanded a $6 million Bitcoin ransom, deliberately choose a mass-produced generic backpack to avoid leaving a unique retail footprint? Or does this generic gear indicate a localized analog criminal who simply bought the cheapest bag available to carry their extraction? Tools. The contrast between the high-tech digital blackout and the low-tech retail gear is a persistent friction point in this case. The physical evidence trail continued 2 miles away from the primary crime scene. Investigators recovered a discarded black glove. Forensics teams processed this item and successfully extracted male deoxyribonucleic acid. The genetic material did not belong to the victim or any known authorized visitors. This glove is the most significant physical vulnerability the suspect left behind. It is a direct biological link to the perpetrator. Yet despite having a clean genetic profile, the federal databases yielded 0 matches. The suspect is not in the combined deoxyribonucleic acid index system. They have no prior felony convictions that required a genetic sample. This lack of a database hit is terrifying. It means the investigators are hunting a ghost. We have a physical height profile. We have a specific retail footprint with the Ozark Trail backpack. We have biological trace evidence. And the system returns absolutely nothing. The data implies an offender who has either never been caught for previous severe crimes, or a highly competent first-time actor executing a meticulously planned operation. The investigators began the grueling process of cross-referencing the backpack data. They pulled regional sales records for the 25-liter black Ozark Trail model. But because it is a cash-accessible item sold at thousands of locations, tracking a specific purchase without a date range is nearly impossible. They analyzed the threading and the wear patterns on the discarded glove, hoping to find trace chemicals or occupational dust that could indicate the suspect's profession. The biological profile was pushed through familial genealogy databases in an attempt to find distant relatives of the suspect. Every standard investigative protocol was deployed. The Federal Bureau of Investigation utilized their behavioral analysis unit to build a working model of the offender. They looked at the calculated destruction of the doorbell camera. They analyzed the cold pragmatism of the pacemaker disconnection. They studied the wording and syntax of the $6 million cryptocurrency demand. The profile that emerged was a terrifying hybrid. They were looking for someone with the physical capability to forcibly extract an adult human and the technical literacy to navigate blockchain extortion and network disruption. This is an incredibly rare combination of skill sets. Usually violent offenders lack complex technical skills, and cybercriminals lack the physical capacity for analog violence. This suspect possesses both. The physical evidence, the blood, the glove, the backpack grounds the crime in a brutal analog reality. But the digital evidence, the camera, the pacemaker, the Bitcoin elevates it to a sophisticated cyber extortion plot. The investigative teams were forced to merge their physical forensic units with their cybercrimes divisions. They were processing blood spatter while simultaneously tracking blockchain ledger movements. The integration of these two divisions was essential. The Ozark Trail bag and the discarded black glove remained the only tangible links to the phantom who vanished into the night. 16 days into the second month, a critical pivot occurred in the trajectory of the inquiry. Detectives formally announced that those closest to the primary subject were no longer under suspicion. Relatives who initially faced the intense scrutiny of federal interrogations were entirely exonerated. Authorities publicly stated that the inner circle bore no responsibility for the disappearance. This development fundamentally shifted the analytical landscape. Historically, domestic incidents heavily indexed toward immediate relatives, or known associates. Removing the inner circle from the board, eliminates the most statistically probable scenario. It forces behavioral profilers to look outward into the unknown. They had to construct a model of a complete stranger who possessed intimate operational knowledge of the target environment. The complexity of this stranger profile is staggering. Consider the economic friction built into the extortion parameters. Demanding a cryptographic fortune from a senior citizen presents a massive logistical paradox. The perpetrator expected an elderly individual to either possess or facilitate the transfer of an immense sum using decentralized ledger technology. This is an incredibly narrow and sophisticated demand. Extortion relies on the victim's capacity to comply. A traditional ransom requests circulating currency precisely because it is universally accessible and untraceable in its physical form. Digital currency requires infrastructure. It necessitates exchange accounts and an understanding of network architecture. Assuming an octogenarian could navigate this system under extreme duress is a severe miscalculation by the offender. Or perhaps it was a deliberate layer of obfuscation. If the true objective was not financial gain, the impossible demand serves as a smokescreen. The document might simply be a misdirection tactic, designed to drain federal resources into tracking international financial nodes, while the physical perpetrator remains localized. The friction between the brutal analog reality of the scene and the hyper-modern digital demand creates a massive blind spot for detectives. They are chasing a shadow that operates in two completely distinct criminal ecosystems. A localized offender does not typically understand blockchain tumblers. An international cybercriminal does not conduct physical abductions. The profile simply does not align with traditional typologies. We are left analyzing a hybrid threat. This hybrid nature creates immense friction for the agencies trying to solve the puzzle. When the dedicated communication channels open, they immediately flood with useless data. If you have any genuine information regarding this exact profile, you must contact the federal authorities immediately. But those authorities are inundated with noise. The public sees the massive financial demand and begins submitting reports about international hacking syndicates. They see the physical breach and submit reports about local burglaries. The synthesis of these two extremes is where the truth lies, but finding that synthesis is nearly impossible. Investigators must filter through thousands of hours of irrelevant chatter. They must determine which anomalies are genuine and which are coincidences. The clearance of the family members removes the only localized focal point the detectives possessed. The inner circle was fully vetted. Their communications were analyzed. Their financial histories were audited. And the result was a definitive lack of involvement. This leaves the task force staring into a void. The perpetrator is entirely disconnected from the social fabric of the victim. This disconnection is the hallmark of a professional targeted operation. The offender studied the environment without ever entering the social orbit of the target. They remained invisible until the exact moment of impact. The demand for a digital fortune acts as a massive anchor, dragging the investigation into the complex world of decentralized finance, while the physical reality of the incident remains grounded in a quiet residential neighborhood. The contrast is jarring, and it continues to stall the forward momentum of the task force. Detectives are forced to wait for a mistake. They are waiting for the digital funds to move across a public ledger. They are waiting for the biological material to trigger a hit in a national database. But the perpetrator remains disciplined. The ledger remains dormant. The genetic profile remains unmatched. The case enters a state of suspended animation where the only active elements are the desperate pleas of a family, waiting for answers. The sheer volume of resources required to maintain a dual-track inquiry is staggering. Cyber divisions are pulling server logs while violent crime units are knocking on doors. This fractured approach dilutes the overall effectiveness of the response. The friction of the impossible demand and the clearance of the localized suspects creates a perfect storm of investigative paralysis. The system is designed to catch offenders who make mistakes based on emotion or proximity. This perpetrator exhibited neither. They executed a cold, calculated breach and vanished, leaving behind an impossible puzzle. The most destructive force in modern investigations is not a lack of evidence, but a surplus of manufactured narratives. This brings us to the ultimate friction point of the entire ordeal. Open source speculation has actively contaminated the public understanding of the available data. Online communities latched onto an unverified story about a receipt from a local home improvement shop. This rumor spread with algorithmic efficiency, convincing thousands of armchair detectives that the key to the mystery lay in a specific retail transaction. This is the danger of internet culture intersecting with federal inquiries. The truth is vastly more disturbing than a careless piece of paper left behind. Cross-referencing the viral claims against the actual physical evidence reveals a total collapse of the popular narrative. The equipment worn by the suspect was traced to a massive multinational big-box retailer. It is an item produced by the millions and distributed globally. It is the absolute antithesis of a unique, highly traceable home improvement purchase. The offender deliberately chose the most generic, untraceable gear available on the consumer market. The internet rumor implies a careless mistake. The federal data implies terrifying operational security. When the public focus shifts to a non-existent retail receipt, the official tip lines become clogged with garbage. Well-meaning. Citizens report every suspicious transaction at their local shops, burying legitimate leads under a mountain of useless information. This is how cases go cold. This is how perpetrators escape justice. They hide behind the static generated by viral misinformation. The true linchpin of this operation is not a piece of paper. It is the steady degradation of the biological trace, left miles away, and the precise execution of the system failures at the percent existum failures at the percent residence. The offender understood that leaving a highly generic, mass-produced bag on camera provides zero actionable intelligence. They understood that demanding untraceable digital currency creates an investigative bottleneck, and they understood that popular media would inevitably generate its own distracting theories. The analytical climax of this entire scenario is the realization that the public is looking in the wrong direction. The focus must remain exclusively on the hard forensic data. We must analyze the degradation of the genetic material on the discarded clothing. We must dissect the specific network architecture that allowed the internal medical monitors to be severed from the outside world. The hardware store theory is a comforting fiction because it suggests the criminal is stupid and prone to basic errors. The terrifying reality is that the criminal is highly disciplined. They engineered a scenario where their physical presence generated almost zero unique data points. The generic clothing, the untraceable, financial demands, the precise severing of communication lines all point to an adversary who actively manages their own signature. If you want evidence-based analysis that strips away the internet fiction and focuses solely on the confirmed data, you need to subscribe to our channel. We dismantle the rumors because the rumors protect the guilty. The intersection of analog violence and digital evasion is the new frontier of criminal behavior. Law. Enforcement is currently losing the arms race against offenders who can operate seamlessly in both domains. The public obsession with a phantom receipt only accelerates that loss. The task force is not looking for a customer who bought a hammer or a roll of tape. They are looking for an anomaly in a network log. They are looking for a microscopic error in a sequence of code. They are looking for a suspect who is entirely comfortable existing as a ghost in the machine. The revelation that the viral narrative is completely false forces us to reevaluate everything we know about the incident. It means the perpetrator is still operating with a significant tactical advantage. They successfully executed the breach. They neutralized the target, and they allowed the internet to build a smokescreen on their behalf. Every hour spent chasing a manufactured retail lead is an hour the offender uses to further distance themselves from the point of impact. The true missing element is not an item purchased over a counter. It is the identity of a ghost who understood exactly how to exploit the vulnerabilities of a connected world. The breakdown of the popular theory leaves us with a stark and uncomfortable truth. The system failed, the perimeter was compromised, and the individual responsible is insulated by a layer of digital and physical anonymity that has yet to be pierced. The focus must return to the rigid timeline and the generic nature of the trace materials. Everything else is a dangerous distraction. The aftermath of the breach left a profound void in the lives of those left behind. The physical trail terminates abruptly on a quiet stretch of asphalt, leaving authorities with nothing but questions. In the absence of forward momentum, the family of the missing woman stepped into the public arena. The daughter, utilizing her massive national platform, initiated a series of broadcast appeals. She leveraged her position in front of millions of viewers to beg for actionable intelligence. These televised pleas were not standard news segments. They were desperate attempts to bypass the stalled federal machinery and appeal directly to the public conscience. The broadcast network dedicated significant airtime to projecting the face of the missing individual across the country. The strategy was clear. If the forensic analysis could not identify the ghost, perhaps immense public pressure could force a mistake. The emotional weight of these broadcasts stands in sharp contrast to the cold clinical reality of the data. A daughter pleading for the return of her mother is a fundamentally human element in a story dominated by network, logs, and cryptographic demands. Yet despite the unprecedented media exposure, the silence remains unbroken. The ongoing manhunt has expanded beyond regional borders, but it lacks a definitive vector, federal. Agents are casting a massive net into a dark ocean, hoping to snag a single piece of viable information. They are tracking the generic height profile against thousands of potential matches. They are monitoring hidden communication nodes for any mention of the specific decentralized financial addresses provided in the extortion document. But the adversary has vanished entirely. The physical evidence ended exactly where the offender intended it to end. The trace materials were discarded deliberately to create a false trail or to simply shed contaminated gear. From that point forward, the individual evaporated into the surrounding environment. Investigators are now trapped in a reactive posture. They cannot force a confrontation because they do not know where to direct their resources. They are entirely dependent on the digital artifacts frozen in the network logs. The silence of the decentralized ledger is deafening. Every day that passes without a transaction further solidifies the theory that the financial demand was a sophisticated misdirection. If the primary motive was monetary gain, the funds would eventually need to be laundered and moved. The complete lack of activity suggests a different, darker motivation. The resolution of this incident is currently suspended in a state of indefinite waiting. The task force meets daily to review the same static data points. The broadcast appeals continue to air, reaching millions of households, but generating zero substantial leads. The local community remains paralyzed by the knowledge that a disciplined actor successfully navigated their environment and extracted a target without triggering a massive immediate response. The unresolved nature of the inquiry leaves a permanent scar on the landscape. It proves that despite our immense technological capabilities, a ghost can still achieve total anonymity. The physical manhunt is constrained by the limitations of the biological trace. The digital manhunt is constrained by the architecture of decentralized networks. The authorities are fighting a war on two fronts, and currently, they are losing both. The distance between the initial point of impact and the discarded materials is a physical manifestation of the investigative gap. Law enforcement can walk that path 1,000 times, but it will not yield new answers. The truth is locked inside the mind of an individual who possesses the discipline to remain absolutely silent while the entire world searches for them. The family continues to broadcast their pleas, hoping that somewhere an associate or the perpetrator themselves will finally break the silence. But until that critical error occurs, the authorities are paralyzed. The standstill is a chilling reminder of the limits of modern investigative techniques. When an adversary completely controls the flow of information, the system simply grinds to a 2 p.m. halt. We are left watching a static board waiting for a phantom to finally make a mistake. The question remains whether that mistake will ever actually happen. What this incident teaches us about the illusion of modern residential security is deeply unsettling. We have outsourced our safety to a complex web of interconnected devices operating on the Internet of Things. We install external visual monitors and internal biometric sensors, and we assume these tools create an impenetrable fortress. This is a fatal miscalculation. Technology does not prevent intrusion, it merely documents it. And when faced with a sophisticated adversary, technology becomes a vulnerability rather than a shield. The behavioral indicators of digital tampering are starkly apparent in this scenario. A random localized failure of a single device might be a hardware glitch, but a sequenced failure where an external perimeter sensor is neutralized, followed by the targeted disconnection of a specific internal health monitor, is a definitive signature of a coordinated breach. This requires us to fundamentally rethink our approach to personal safety. We cannot rely solely on systems that can be disabled by anyone with sufficient technical literacy and physical proximity. The macro analysis of this event exposes a critical flaw in our societal reliance on digital infrastructure. The architectural design of consumer-grade security systems prioritizes convenience over absolute resilience. They are built to deter amateurs, not to stop dedicated professionals. When the physical perimeter is breached by analog methods, the digital safeguards immediately collapse. The camera lenses are blinded, and the data streams are severed. We are left with the terrifying realization that our homes are only as secure as the weakest point in our network. A true defensive posture requires layered analog redundancies that cannot simply be switched off from a remote terminal or bypassed with a rudimentary physical tool. The ultimate lesson here is that true security is never fully automated. The architecture of this vanishing act forces us to confront the fragility of the systems we trust most. We stripped away the viral noise and the manufactured retail theories to expose the cold mechanical truth of a perfectly executed extraction. An adversary bypassed a digital fortress, manipulated biological monitoring equipment, and vanished into the night, leaving behind nothing but generic materials and an impossible, cryptographic demand. The authorities remain trapped in a maze of dead ends while a family broadcasts their grief to millions, hoping for a single, actionable response. If an extractor can dismantle a highly monitored environment with such absolute precision, what does that mean for the automated defenses you arm before you go to sleep tonight? The illusion of safety is the greatest advantage a predator possesses. If you want to continue analyzing the darkest corners of human behavior and systematic failure, join us in our next psychological breakdown. We will examine a case where the digital footprint was not erased but deliberately fabricated to frame an innocent target. Hit subscribe and prepare for the next descent into the forensic reality of true crime. Stay vigilant out there.